All right, guys. Well, thank you so much for joining me. The purpose of today's class is obviously you guys have all been hearing about it. And if you haven't been hearing about it, you've been under a rock. So whether you're watching this live or you're watching this recording, I hope that you pay close attention because these are changes that are coming. They're coming really fast. They're going to be effective August 17th. And these forms have already been released. They will be on your .loop soon. They're working on that at the corporate office. But I want to make sure that you guys understand how to fill these forms out, what you're going to need these forms for, and how you're going to use them, and in what instance are you going to use them, right? Because there's going to be different situations and you're going to have to use different forms for every situation. So the first one I wanted to go through is our exclusive buyer's brokerage agreement. So if you haven't been using that in the past, that is going to be absolutely mandatory. There's no going around it. There's no, we are going to be fined $500 each instance that we go and show homes without having that agreement signed. Okay, which means it has to be signed before you go show houses, not after you go show houses and then have your client sign, but before you go show houses. Okay. And the reason that we're doing this is obviously because we want to make sure now with the new changes coming to the MLS, you will not be able to see your or the commission that is being, or the compensation that's being offered to the buyer's brokerage from the listing brokerage. So because that information is no longer going to be available, we're going to have to go through some additional steps to make sure that we secure our compensation, our professional fee. Okay. So we're going to go ahead and get started. And if you guys have any questions in between, please go ahead and interrupt me, raise your hand, whatever, I will stop. But I want to make sure that you guys really understand this. So if you have any questions, please unmute yourself and just ask away, because I want to make sure that you guys do understand the importance of these forms and why you're going to need to use them. Okay. So I'm going to share my screen and I'm going to share, let's see here. All right, so first we're going to share the exclusive buyer brokerage agreement. Now this was updated a little bit. It almost looks exactly the same as the old one, but there were some verbiage changes in the form. So we're going to go through it step by step. If you guys, again, have any questions, please interrupt me and we will go ahead and go through them. So parties, obviously the consumer. Who is the consumer? Before it used to say buyer. That's one of the changes that has been made. So now no longer will you see buyer, you will see consumer, which is your buyer, right? So parties, the consumer are any parties involved in the transaction. So if the buyer is husband, wife, brother, sister, 3 kids, whoever the buyers are that are going to be on the offer, those are the names that are going to go on here. Okay. So consumer, broker, who's our broker? La Rosa Realty. Okay, that is who our broker is. So those are the ones that you're going to have to fill in. The consumer, any buyers that are related to this possible offer, and the broker, which is La Rosa Realty LLC. Okay. All right, so let's go ahead and read this. The exclusive right to work with and assist the consumer in locating and negotiating the acquisition of suitable real property as described below. The term acquire or acquisition includes any purchase, option, exchange, lease, or other acquisition of an ownership or equity interest in real property. This means any transaction that you're going to be doing with that consumer, with that buyer, this is basically covering everybody, okay? Term, this agreement will begin on, obviously, this agreement will begin on the date of or the date before you show any homes. You cannot, again, I'm going to stress this again, you cannot show any homes without this agreement being signed. Now, let me just stop there for 1 second. There will be a showing agreement form that is being revised now and should be out hopefully by mid-July, or before by the end of July. Let's just put it that way, because they've been giving us some dates and some of the dates are not corresponding. But they are coming out with a showing form. This showing form is only going to be used for one showing. So if you have, let's say, I don't know, somebody who just needs you to do that one showing for that one house because they saw you at an open house and they want to go see another house, and they don't want to make a commitment, but it gives you an opportunity to have that showing agreement, which again, that form is going to come out, that will allow you to show one home. But other than that, if they're going to see more homes, they've already contracted you as their agent. So this form needs to be filled out before you go show them any additional properties. Okay. So this agreement will begin on date and will terminate at 11:59 p.m. on what date? So this is going to determine how long you're planning to represent this client. So you know your clients, better than most of us. So I would at least do it for 6 months, because there are some buyers that'll make a decision in 2 weeks to buy a home. There's some buyers that might make a decision in 4 weeks or 5 weeks or 6 weeks, right? So just cover yourselves. Give yourself at least 6 months, if minimum 3 months, okay? Termination date. However, if consumer enters into an agreement to acquire property that is pending on the termination date, this agreement will continue in effect until the transaction has closed or otherwise terminated. This is basically just saying, if my agreement with the buyer, right? So I have Noemi, who's my buyer, and we agreed that I was going to represent Noemi until July 31st, okay? And we enter into a contract on July 31st. Even though this has expired, it's telling you that even though that it has expired, if you enter into a contract by the end of this agreement, you still are able to collect your compensation, okay? Property. Consumer is interested in acquiring real property as follows or as otherwise acceptable to consumer. Type of property and location. Now, we all know buyers, right? One day they want a condo, the next day they want a townhouse, the next day they want a single family, the next day they want a multifamily, right? So in order for you to cover yourself, put everything in there. Put what type of property? Single family house, townhouse, condo, multifamily, right? Because now it covers you on all aspects, even if they change their mind from single family, or maybe they got qualified supposedly because they wanted a single family, but their budget only allows a townhouse. You don't have to redo this whole thing again, right? It's all covered in there. So put everything in there. Location. How many haven't? Yes, I want to buy in Homestead. No, I want to buy in Miami. No, I'll take Broward. No, I'll take Doral. No, I'll take, right? We have those kind of buyers. So location, Miami or Miami-Dade County and Broward County. That way you're covered on both counties. If they decide now that they want to go buy in Port St. Lucie, then we need to modify this agreement, right? But you want to make sure that you're broad and not precise, because if you put here in Homestead, because that's what they decided on point A, and now they decide to buy in Broward County, now this is not as enforceable, right? They can go back and say, oh no, but we didn't buy in Homestead, we bought in Broward County. Okay, so just cover yourselves and be more broad. Broker's obligations, broker assistance. Broker will use broker's professional knowledge and skills. These are basically just going over what the broker's obligations are. Okay. So consumer negotiating and closing any resulting transaction, cooperate with real estate licensees working with the owner, if any, to complete the transaction. Other consumer understands that brokers may work with other prospective consumers who want to acquire the same property. So this is covering you, letting the buyer know, or the consumer, that if you have another buyer who's interested in the same property, you can still show that property. So you're not basically tied to them in a sense. You're letting them know that you're disclosing that you can show that property to another consumer or another buyer that you're working with, okay? So this is just, again, the obligations. I'm not going to go through everything because we have a lot of forms to go through. So just take the time and read what this says, okay? Fair housing broker, obviously that we're a fair housing broker. Service provider broker does not warrant or guarantee products or services. So that's just, again, covering you as far as your services are concerned. Consumer's obligations. Consumer agrees to cooperate with broker in accomplish at the objectives of this agreement, including conducting all negotiations and efforts to locate suitable property. Only through broker and referring to broker all inquiries of any kind from real estate licensees, property owners, or any other source. So basically, this is telling the buyer, the consumer, that they also have responsibilities to you, right? So it's a commitment that you give them and a commitment that they give you. So make sure that you read this to them and they understand this, okay? Broker and consumer will at first opportunity advise the owner or real estate licensee that consumer is working with and being represented exclusively by broker. Okay, so let's read that again. Broker, consumer, or let's read it from the start. Conducting all negotiations and efforts to locate suitable property only through broker and referring to broker all inquiries of any kind from real estate licensees, property owners, or any other source. If consumer contacts or is contacted by an owner or a real estate licensee who is working with an owner or views a property unaccompanied by the broker, consumer will at first opportunity advise the owner or real estate licensee that consumer is working and represented exclusively by broker. So basically, this is telling the buyer, Mr. Buyer, if you go to an open house and you decide to talk to the listing agent for that open house because you went there without me, you have to, this is your responsibility, you have to let that agent, right, that listing agent or the owner of that property, if you happen to go to a for sale by owner, that you are being represented exclusively by a broker. Basically, I have a signed contract with a different broker, okay? Providing broker and necessary third parties, which is lenders, closing agents, etc., with accurate information requested by broker or third parties in connection with ensuring consumers' ability to acquire the property. Consumer authorizes broker to run credit check to verify consumers' credit information. This is only, obviously, we're not going to do this because our brokerage doesn't run credit checks. That's obviously up to the lender or, whoever they're working with, but it's just letting them know that there might be a possibility. Being available to meet with broker at reasonable times for consultations and to view properties. Indemnifying and holding broker harmless from and against all losses, damages, costs, and expenses of any kind, including attorney fees, and from the liability to any person that the broker incurs because of acting on consumers' behalf. Not asking or expecting to restrict the acquisition of a property according to race, color, religion, sex, handicap. So basically you're giving them, the fair housing rules, right? Consulting an appropriate professional for legal tax, environmental engineering, foreign reporting requirements, and other specialized advice. Again, we're not surveyors, we're not attorneys, we're not anything of that nature. So they understand that if there's anything that they need professional advice from, that they have to seek legal, tax, environmental, engineering, foreign reporting from a specialized person, not us, okay? Making a diligent good faith effort to perform the contract terms of any purchase agreement or contract to lease and close the sale of any property consumer contracts to acquire, okay? Retainer, a non-refundable retainer. So this is one that we're still trying to figure out at La Rosa Realty. So I'm not going to go over this too much because remember, as a retainer, we would have to, as a brokerage, hold escrow, which we do not have. So as a company, we don't hold escrow. So because we don't have an escrow account, we can't really legally ask for a retainer at this time. Will that maybe change in the future because of all these changes? Maybe, depending on how things go in the future. So maybe in the future, we might be able to request a retainer, sort of like a deposit that, you know, you're going to work with me. And if you decide to go haywire and go with someone else, I can keep your retainer, right? Basically. So, but right now I'm not going to talk a lot about that because it's not something that we will be doing as a La Rosa Realty agent. All right, compensation. Broker's compensation is earned when, during the term of this agreement or any renewal or extension, consumer or any person acting for or on behalf of consumer contracts to acquire real property as specified in this agreement or defaults on any contract to acquire this property. This compensation is for broker services for consumer. Compensation received by broker, if any, from any owner or owner's broker for services rendered to consumer will reduce any amount owed by consumer per this paragraph. So what does this mean? So basically what this means is that the compensation for the broker services for the consumer, compensation received by another broker. So let's say there's a listing broker and now that listing broker is willing to cooperate with some of their compensation. So now we have to reduce that compensation from what we're charging our client, our buyer. Okay. So for instance, if you're charging 3% to your buyer to represent your buyer in the transaction, but now the listing broker says, well, you know, I'm willing to cooperate. I'm going to cooperate with 2%. That means that you can only charge your buyer the 1%. You can't charge your buyer 3% and take the 2% that the seller is giving. Okay? Can't do that. So whatever you agree to in this contract, if you're getting compensation from somewhere else for this transaction, you cannot charge the whole thing. You have to just charge the buyer the difference. Now we're going to talk a little bit about making sure that you do this correctly. So purchase or exchange amount or percentage, right? So are you charging a flat fee or are you charging a percentage of the total purchase price, right? Or other consideration for the acquired property, payable no later than the date of closing specified in the sales contract. However, closing is not a prerequisite for broker's fee to be earned. This is super important because this is protecting you, again, if the buyer goes south, right? They have an agreement with you. You show them a property, but now they go behind your back and try to purchase the property with the listing agent, or they try to purchase the property directly with the owner. You are still owed your commission. Okay, you're still owed your fee. This is lease, so this is also going to apply for leases. Okay, so it's not only for sales, it's now also for rentals. So now this will protect you with rentals, because how many times haven't we have renters who are shopping around and they make you go see 4 properties and all of a sudden now they go and rent up the another property with another agent, right? So this again will protect you from those runaway renters. Okay. So again, this is just, again, you're going to put in either a flat fee or a percentage. And then this again would be of, you know, 1 month's rent or half a month's rent or whatever you're going to put on here. Okay. And again, this would be if it's a purchase or exchange, are you charging a flat fee or are you charging a percentage? Now let's talk about these charges. So if we already know that you're charging your buyer, or you're putting on this contract that you're charging your buyer, let's say you want to be nice. And Mr. Buyer, I'm only going to charge you 1%. Okay. Because, you know, I want to help you out. But now you find them a property and the listing broker is willing to share 2% or 2.5%. What's going to happen? Can anybody tell me?
I'm only allowed to take 1%.
I'm sorry, what did you just say?
Okay, if I tell the buyer that I'm going to charge 1% and the listing broker is offering 2%, I only can take 1%.
That is correct. So you have to be very smart about that, right?
It's better
So
go up.
go up, and then you can always go down, because if you
Okay,
start down, you can't go up, right?
got it.
You
Mm-hmm.
could go up, but it's going to be a challenge getting your buyer to now sign a new agreement with a new fee. Okay.
Yeah.
So I would rather you put 3%, 4, whatever it is. Keep in mind new construction. We have a lot of new construction or people that start at resale and all of a sudden end up in new construction. There's a lot of new constructions that are paying 4% sometimes commission, or they're paying, 3% plus a $5,000 bonus, right? You're going to, if you only limit yourself to putting whatever that 3% here, and now you take this buyer to a new construction and they're paying 4%, guess what? You're only getting paid 3%, right? Because now you can't charge that other 1% and you can't even keep the bonus. So it's really important that you guys put up there, your 3%, 3.5%. If you know that they want to shop for new construction, put 4%, because even again, you can always go down, right? If the listing broker decides, oh, we're going to give you 3%, or the new construction is going to give you 3% or 2.5, you can always go back to the buyer and say, Mr. Buyer, I'm okay collecting 2.5% because they're going to pay me 2.5. I'm not going to charge you anything. Okay. And you can do that, but you can't go up. You can go down, but you can't go up. So make sure that you're protected, because if you take them to a new construction that's paying 4% with $5,000 bonus and you only have 3% on your contract, guess what? You're only getting paid 3% because you
One
can't charge the
question.
difference. Mm-hmm.
Can I, can the clients, can I make my clients, the buyer to sign the same document twice? Once for, condo, single house, and one if he decided to go with the new constructions?
Yes,
Okay.
you can. You can have two agreements and have one for new construction and have one for multi or for a resale. Yes, you can.
Okay.
Okay. You can also, we're going to go over, there's also modification to compensation. So if they're
In
willing to sign a
modification.
modification to a compensation, yes.
Okay, and when we talk about modification, because it happened that sometimes there are a couples buying the property, and during the transaction, there's one more person added to the transaction. Do we have to modify this document since
Yes.
it's not on the okay?
Yes. You do have to modify the document if they're not on the actual document. Okay.
Okay.
All right. So now we know about fees and how to make sure that you're charging the right fee so that you don't get shortchanged on possible commission or compensation. Okay. Other broker will be compensated for other types of acquisitions, as in such acquisition were a purchase or exchange. And here you can, again, you have a space to put additional fees. So let's say right here, if you want your buyer to pay the transaction fee, you know how we have the La Rosa disclosure? So here you would have to enter that $495 transaction fee if you're charging your client the $495. If it's not on this agreement, even with our Rosa disclosure saying that they're okay paying the $495, that can become a problem. Okay. So make sure that you have it here, because this is what the title company is going to ask you for when they're paying out. So maybe along with the CDA, they're also going to require this. Okay, which shows what your compensation is supposed to be. So if you want the buyer to pay the $495 transaction fee, might want to add it here as well. If not, you might get stuck paying that transaction fee. Okay. Protection period. Consumer will compensate broker if within, you pick the number, 60 days, 30 days, 90 days, whatever, after termination date, consumer contracts to acquire any property which was called to consumers' attention by broker or any other person, or found by consumer during the term of this agreement. So consumer's obligation to pay broker's fee ceases upon the consumer entering into a good faith exclusive buyer brokerage agreement with another broker after termination date. So let's read that carefully. It says, consumer will compensate the broker if within, let's say, 30 days after the termination date. So after this is terminated, right? Because you're going to have some some buyers who might want to terminate this agreement, right? They might say, I decided, no, I'm just going to go work with my sister, so I want to cancel our agreement. Okay? Which they can. They can cancel their agreement, but that's where you need to make sure that you're protected. Because if they cancel the agreement, let's say you take them to go see 123 Main Street, and now they're like, you know what? I decided I'm just gonna, let my sister, show me houses. I want to cancel this agreement. And they go back and to that same 123 Main Street and now make an offer with their sister. This will protect you. So if you don't have at least some sort of protection period in here, you can't go back and collect, especially if you were the procuring cause of that client finding that house. Okay. So after termination date, consumer contracts to acquire any property which was called to consumer's attention by broker or any other person or found by the consumer during the term of this agreement. So this is even protecting you if they found a house on their own. Let's say they found a house on Zillow, but you took them to go see that house on Zillow that they wanted to see. You were the procuring cause of that property, whether they found it on Zillow or not, right? Consumer's obligation to pay broker's fees ceases upon consumer entering into a good faith exclusive buyer brokerage agreement with another broker after the termination date. Okay. This I'm going to discuss with, because can be a little confusing when you really read it, because it says consumer's obligation to pay broker's fee ceases upon a consumer entering into a good faith exclusive buyer brokerage agreement with another broker after the termination date. So if that's the case, why do we need this, right? So that's a little confusing to me, which I'm going to probably bring that up in our next broker meeting to see what they think about that, but just keep that in the back of your head. All right, conditional termination. At consumer's request, broker may agree to conditionally terminate this agreement. If broker agrees to conditionally terminate this agreement, consumer must enter a written agreement to this effect and pay a cancellation fee of. I highly recommend putting a cancellation fee in there. Why? Because how many times haven't we had buyers, we show them 15 houses and all of a sudden, I changed my mind, or, oh, I think I'm going to wait another 6 months. Oh, da 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 da, excuse after excuse, because maybe they're using another brokerage, right? So you want to put a cancellation fee here. Mr. Buyer, I'm okay canceling your contract, but I spend time with you. So if you decide to cancel this contract and I've shown you whatever, X, Y, Z houses, there will be a cancellation fee,
Is
right?
there, is there a specific cancellation fee that we
Nope.
have in mind?
Remember, the broker has no say in what you want to charge as far as a cancellation fee is concerned. Okay.
So I can put $500 or $100.
You could put whatever you want. You can put $2,000. You could put $3,000. Whatever you feel is justified compensation for your time.
Okay,
Okay.
thanks. Okay,
Also keep in mind that on this part here, oh, we did have this discussion, which we're having as a corporation, as La Rosa Realty, that we will require the agents to charge a minimum of 2% to the buyers who they are representing. So it's going to have to be at least a minimum of 2%. Okay. So if you're thinking, oh, obviously there will be exceptions. So if it's your sister, or you're helping your son, or you're helping your daughter buy a house, or whatever that case may be, there's going to be exceptions to this rule. But they do want to set a standard as to what the minimum is that you're going to charge. Now, obviously, if the listing brokerage is willing to pay compensation, then it doesn't really matter, right? Because you're still getting paid your compensation. But if there is no compensation from the listing side and you're really getting the compensation from your buyer, they want at least a minimum of 2% as a fair compensation for yourself. There will be exceptions to that rule. If it's a family member, if it's your own house, if it's, whatever it is, there are going to be exceptions to that rule. Okay. All right, so let's go on to conditional termination. Obviously, you can put a cancellation fee there. If dispute resolution, this agreement will be construed under Florida law. All controversies, claims, and other matters or questions between the parties arising out of this relating or out of or relating to this agreement or the breach thereof will be settled by first attempting mediation. So we all know we attempt to go through the process of just getting it mediated and coming to a mutual agreement. If it does not get handled through mediation, then we have to go into arbitration, and then we have to decide whether it's worth it or not. And if after arbitration, if we need to take it to a higher power or whatever, then obviously we go to litigation, right? But this is just letting them that this is the way the dispute the dispute resolution is going to be handled: mediation, then arbitration, and finally litigation if we need to go into litigation. Okay. Persons bound. Broker may assign this agreement to another broker. Okay, this agreement will be bind and insure to broker and consumers, heirs, personal representatives, successors, and assigns. So this is just an assignment, basically. Persons bound. Broker may assign this agreement to another broker. Right? So if I have a contract with Noemi, she's my buyer, where I represent La Rosa Realty, but now I don't know, I changed to Keller Williams. I can just roll over this agreement over to Keller Williams as the broker now, since I'm with Keller Williams, and I don't have to have my client re-sign. Okay. Brokerage relationship. Broker will act as a transaction broker. We are all transaction brokers here in the state of Florida. Broker will deal honestly and fairly, will account for all funds, will use care and skill and care and diligence in the transaction, will disclose all known facts that materially affect the value of the residential property, which are not readily observable to buyer, will represent all offers and counter offers and da-da-da-da-da-da. That's just all the mumbo jumbo that obviously you guys can read on your own. Here's other terms. If you want to put other terms in here of any sort, you can put this contract is only, to show 10 houses. Anything after 10 houses, my fee will go up to 4%, whatever additional terms you want to put in there, you can add those additional terms there. Okay. Acknowledgement modifications. Consumer has read this agreement and understands its contents. This agreement cannot be changed except by written agreement signed by both parties. Electronic signatures will be acceptable and binding. Brokerage commissions are not set by law and are fully negotiable. Broker may not receive compensation from any source that exceeds the amount or rate agreed to by this consumer. This is just reiterating again, you cannot charge more than what you're charging the buyer. Okay, so if it says 3%, that's all you're getting. Even if the selling listing brokerage is willing to pay 5%, you're only getting 3%. Okay. However, consumer agrees that broker may receive separate compensation from the owner of the property for services rendered to owner by broker, for which consumer will not be responsible. So this is just letting them know, hey, even though the listing side is offering, let's say 4%, right? That extra 1% is basically just saying, just be aware that an extra 1% that could have been your compensation is now going back to the broker of the owner, right? So it's going back to the listing brokerage. Okay. All right. Consumer name, consumer signature. Yes.
Could you please repeat again the number 14?
Number 14.
Modifications?
Yes. So consumer has read this agreement and understands, okay, whatever. This agreement cannot be changed except by written agreement signed by both parties. Brokerage, this is the important part. Brokerage commissions are not set by law and are fully negotiable. Broker may not receive compensation from any source that exceeds the amount or rate agreed to the consumer.
Okay.
That's just, again, reconfirming that we can only charge whatever we put on this contract. Okay. However, consumer agrees that broker may receive separate compensation from the owner of the property for services rendered to owner by broker for which consumer will not be responsible.
Be responsible. Okay.
Okay. So now the consumer name, their address, all their information gets on there, authorized sale associate or broker. Now, this is what obviously, excuse me, it says authorized associate or broker. Okay. Consumer and or broker's associate. So the consumer is going to initial here, just like any other document that we have. And the broker or sales associate is going to sign here. Okay. So it really would be the broker would have to initial this when we submit this document to La Rosa. And obviously our initials would go here as the associate. Okay. But let me go back to this one again, to the consumer and then the broker and the associate. Okay. So just make sure that you understand that the broker also has to sign this agreement when you submit it. Okay. Just like we have the exclusive right of listing. Now, keep in mind too that the exclusive right of listing might also change. Okay. So they're working on changing the verbiage in the exclusive right of listing. They're not anticipating to release that, if any, they supposedly before August 17th. So before all this goes live, but hopefully we'll have enough time to be able to train on the new changes. We're just dependent on, you know, NAR and the Florida realtors to come up with the new listing agreements. Okay. All right. I'm going to go on to the next form.
Wait, I have a question.
Of
So
course.
back to the 2%, 3%, 4%. How am I going to know what percentage to put down on my side if I don't know what the other broker is going to do? So
You're not.
you're not. So might as well make it high.
Yes. And that's what I'm recommending. I'm recommending that you make it higher because
Right.
you can always come down.
Okay.
Right. So
All
even
right.
if the, you know, when you're having the conversation with the buyer, right? And let's say you put 4%, for instance, right? I mean, if
Right.
you're okay just getting paid 3% on a transaction, then, you know, if you feel comfortable, that's enough compensation for you, just put 3%. The only thing is that if the other side is paying more, then you just left some compensation on the table, right? Can you
Does
go
the other
back? Can you go back to your buyer and say, oh, Mr. Buyer, you know what? I found you a house that is willing to pay 4% towards the purchase of this house, right? The listing brokerage is willing to pay 4%. So in order for you not to have to pay this percent, let me go ahead and have you re-sign this agreement. We're going to put 4% so that the listing brokerage can pay me that 4%. And that way you're not responsible for anything.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay. So you
And
can do modifications. And, you know, the thing is that it's going to be harder because this is what a buyer might come back and say and tell you, right?
right, right.
Well, it says 3%, they're paying 4%. Why can't I get that 1%? Why does it have to
Right.
go to you?
Not quite complicated. And one more question. At any time, are they going to make these contracts in Spanish? There's
No,
so many Hispanic people now, more than ever.
nope. So there are, if you go to the Florida's Board of Realtors, there are sample contracts. They're probably going to add these to it, these addendums. There's going to be samples that will be in Spanish for you, or maybe for you to explain to your client.
Right, right.
However, you will not be able to sign those documents. The signed documents have to be in English.
Okay. As long as there's
Okay?
something in Spanish that you can read to them and say, this is this and that is that. So they
Right.
don't tell you, oh, I'll have to find a lawyer that will translate this for me. All right. Okay. Thanks.
Okay. All right, let's go to the next one. Compensation agreement, seller to buyer's broker. Okay. So if you find a seller, let's say it's a for sale by owner. This is kind of an instance of a for sale by owner, right? You have a buyer, you're working with a buyer, you know, but they want to go see a for sale by owner. That's the property they want. You go to this for sale by owner, you say, okay, Mr. Seller, I have a potential buyer for you, but hey, this is what my compensation rate is. Are you willing to pay me to bring you this buyer? And they said, yes, if we go into a contract, I will pay you commission, right? So this would be the document that you would use because this is the seller agreeing to pay the buyer's broker. right? I'm the buyer's broker. I have a client. I took them to us for sale by owner. My for sale by owner really wants to make an offer on this house. Now I got to go back to the seller and say, okay, Mr. Seller, you know, I have a potential buyer for this home. Are you willing to pay compensation? Yes, perfect. I need you to sign this agreeing that you're going to pay me XYZ and or the brokerage XYZ for me bringing you the buyer. Okay. So this is a seller to buyer's broker. Again, the seller to buyer's broker compensation agreement is between the buyer's broker, me, because I'm representing the buyer, right? La Rosa Realty, and the seller, whoever the seller of that property is. Okay. The property address. I would also put the property description, right? So put the property address and the property's description. Listed by seller's broker if they have a broker, because they might not have a broker. Okay. This also can be used if, let's say, the seller, they listed the property with me and they said 4%, but I'm not willing to give my 4%. But I told Mr. Seller, hey, if I charge 4%, if another brokerage brings the buyer, you're going to have to pay that brokerage if you want to sell your house. Are you willing to pay that broker if it comes from another, or that buyer? Are you willing to pay that brokerage if they bring a buyer for this property? Because I'm not willing to share my 4%. Or let's say they agree to only pay you 3%, right? I'll pay you 3%. If another brokerage decides to bring me the buyer, then I'll make a decision then if I want to pay them commission. So this could be for that situation as well. Okay. Term. This compensation agreement takes effect when a fully executed copy has been delivered to all parties to this agreement and will remain in effect. Again, put a date, right? If left blank, it's 30 days. What's an average closing? About 45 days. So I would at least put 45 days. Okay. If in no event shall, or you can even put 60 days. In no event shall the term extend past the termination date of seller's broker's current listing of the property, including any extensions or effective protection periods, except that upon full execution of a contract for sale and purchase by a buyer of the property procured by the buyer's broker, which is the purchase agreement, the as-is agreement, the term will automatically extend through the date of the actual closing. So what does this mean? In no event shall the term extend past the termination date of seller's broker's current listing of the property. I have a listing. My listing expires July 31st. Noemi brings me a buyer. We go under contract, right? We're good because we went under contract. And this is we went into a contract before the expiration of my listing. But let's say you have this agreement with the seller, but now the listing expired. My listing expired on July 31st. This pretty much becomes null and void, right? Because we don't have an existing contract or purchase agreement yet. So even if let's say my listing expired 7/31, my buyer still hasn't made up their mind about making an offer, not making an offer, and now Noemi's buyer decides to make an offer on August 3rd. Well, if this listing expired on July 31st, this contract is null and void, right? But if we go under contract, while that listing, if we go under contract, let's say on July 30th, and the listing expires July 31st, you're still owed your compensation from the seller, even though the listing has already expired, but because you went under contract before the listing expired. Okay. All right. Any questions so far? We're all getting it? Okay. Buyer's broker compensation. If buyer's broker is the procuring cause of the sale of property during the term. So if the buyer's broker is the procuring cause of the sale of property during the term, seller will compensate buyer's broker as stated below at closing of the property. So this is now just talking about the compensation. Seller agrees to compensate buyer's broker, check one. Check, 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 whichever applies. It's going to be a flat amount, a percentage of the gross purchase price, plus if you're charging anything extra, if you're charging the transaction fee, whatever, or other specify. Compensation, I want the flat screen TV, right? So whatever it is, this is where you're going to put, okay? The compensation. Other terms, you have a space for other terms. Let's say there's some other terms. I don't know. Could be anything. Seller and buyer's broker. Nowhere here does it say associate. So who does this have to be signed by? The broker. It's going to be one more step, which means because now this is going to be almost like a referral agreement. Before we do anything, we have to make sure that this is signed by the brokers. Okay. So if the seller's the one agreeing to pay the broker, then the seller has to sign and the broker has to sign, not the associate. Okay. And pay attention to what these say, because some of them will say seller and buyer's broker or authorized associate. I'm going to recommend that they all, I mean, if you have to send it for the broker to sign it here, you might as well just have the broker sign it here too, to cover yourself, right? Even though it says authorized associate. I mean, the broker already has to sign it anyway, so let him sign everything, okay? So again, dispute resolution, arbitration, how that's handled, but pay attention to where the initials go. And again, even if it says authorized associate, if the broker already has to sign this form and in some other place, you might as well just have them sign where they need to sign so that you're not responsible. Remember, because this is, what does it say? Seller to buyer's broker. It does not say seller to buyer's agent. Okay. Miscellaneous clauses. This agreement will be construed under Florida law. Electronic signatures are acceptable. Brokers' commissions are not set by law and are fully negotiable. Again, that's just a disclosure, letting the whoever's signing this that it's all negotiable. There's no set fee. You can charge whatever you decide, or your broker decides the fee is going to be. Seller signature, buyer's broker. Even though it says broker or authorized associate, I would just do broker. Okay. Seller, and again, buyer's broker. So if they have to sign, the broker has to sign here, and they have to sign in that other place, might as well just have them sign all the places that say broker and call it a day, right? And then you're done with that form. All right, any questions regarding this one?
I have a question.
Claro, Maria.
When you say that the broker should sign the document, what happens if you need to have it signed during the weekend and the office does not work? We have to wait.
You have to wait. The broker has to sign it. You can get the seller to sign it first, right? As long as the seller has signed it, you can deliver the form on Monday to the seller, right? So now the seller signed it. Now you know you have to send it Monday for the broker to sign. So now on Monday, when both parties have signed, now you can send it back to a copy to the seller.
So we would send it like normally to celebration office.
Correct.
Through
the same way that we submit it through that loop, you can submit it to celebration and just you can send it directly to Debbie or Laverne and have them sign it.
Excellent. Thank you.
Okay.
All right.
Yes. One question about the first form, the exclusive buyer brokerage agreement.
Yes.
You recommend to be signed a day before you start showing a property. But what happened, for example, is a listing come up this morning and my client want to see it this afternoon and it's available to be shown.
You can take the listing, you can take the agreement with you and have them sign it before you go into the house.
Okay, but it's not mandatory that it has to be a day before.
No.
It's a recommendation.
It's a recommendation.
Okay.
Before you start going out and showing properties. But if for some reason, they're not available but you're going to see them at the showing, before you go inside the house, just say, look, before I can show you legally now, it's required by the National Association of Realtors that we have to have this signed before I can let you into this house.
Got it.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Let's go to the seller's broker to buyer's broker. So this is the one that you're probably going to use the most, besides obviously the exclusive buyer brokerage agreement. This is seller's broker to buyer's broker. This is telling you that is an agreement between the selling or the listing brokerage and the buyer's brokerage. Listing agent, buyer's agent, same thing, right? But it's broker, broker to broker. So what you're going to do is, this is the one that you're going to use most often. So let's say now we go in the MLS, there's no show of compensation, right? We have no idea if they're paying compensation or not. So now we have to call the listing agent. Hey, Mr. Listing agent, I have a potential buyer that I want to take to go see your property. Are you offering any compensation? Right? Now they say, yes, we're offering compensation. We're offering 2% to a buyer or a brokerage that brings the buyer. Perfect. So you can now go show that house, right? And before you make the offer, you have to have this agreement signed. So you take the buyer. I love the house. I want to make an offer on the house. Perfect, Mr. Buyer. Let me get working on that, right? Now, the first thing I'm going to go back is I'm going to fill out this. That's the first thing I'm going to fill out. And now I'm going to send it to the listing agent. And I'm going to say, okay, here's I have a buyer for your property. We're about to make an offer. I just need to have my compensation, the 2.5% you said that you are going to cooperate with. We just need to, come into a written agreement. Okay? Because remember, now it's not on the MLS. So you have no proof on the MLS printout what they said they were going to pay. We can't hold them to that. And who knows, on that listing agreement, they might not even share how much they're paying the buyer's agent, right? So here is a seller's broker to buyer's broker. So this is the first form you're going to fill out and send it to that listing agent so that they can have their broker signed the agreement, not the agent. If the agent signs the agreement, you have to send it back. There's going to be a lot of agents that don't know what the heck they're doing, and they're going to sign it themselves. They cannot sign it themselves. This is a seller's broker, not a seller's agent, to buyer's broker, not buyer's agent. So the brokers have to agree, because remember, the compensation is given to the brokers. It's not given to the agents, and then the broker pays you. So it has to be in a written agreement between the brokers. Okay. So seller's broker, obviously you're going to put in whoever the seller's broker is and the buyer's brokerage. Okay. So if I'm sending this to the listing agent, seller's broker is Keller Williams, buyer's brokerage is La Rosa Realty LLC. You're going to put the property address. You're going to put the property description. Buyer's name optional, complete if applicable. So let's say that you have 3 buyers interested in the same property, which might not really happen, but never know. You might have 2 buyers that you're working with and they're interested in the exact same property, and you're going to submit 2 offers for each buyer, right? So here you can either leave this blank because it will apply to any buyer you take, or to that property for whatever, or you can put in the buyer that you're about to send an offer with or for, right? So I don't like to leave anything to miscommunication, misrepresentation. I rather have everything black and white. So I would put the buyer's name on here, because now I have the buyer's information on there. My offer is going to have the buyer's information on the offer. Now this goes with this, right? If I just leave it blank, they could just say, well, you didn't tell me which buyer this was for, so now they're not together, right? Now they can come back and say whatever they want. So I would just put the buyer's information in here. If you're about to make an offer for Noemi and her husband, you're going to put Noemi's name and her husband's name on here. These are the buyers. And this is the offer that I'm sending you with these buyers. Okay. Term, this compensation agreement takes effect when a fully executed copy has been delivered to all parties to this agreement and will remain in effect for, again, How long do you think once you send that offer that transaction is going to close, right? Put 60 days. I mean, if it takes 40, great. If it takes 30, even better. But, if it takes 60, at least you're covered. In no event shall this term extend past the termination date of seller's broker's current listing of the property, including any extension. So the same thing, effective protection periods, except that upon all execution of this contract for sale and purchase by the buyer of the property procured by the buyer's broker, which is the purchase agreement, the term will automatically extend through the date of the actual closing of the purchase agreement. So again, if the listing terminates while you're under contract, you're good. But if the listing terminates before you submit that offer, this is null and void. Okay? Buyer's broker's compensation. Seller's broker will compensate buyer's broker as stated below at the closing of property if buyer identified above in paragraph 3 closes on the property. So see how this is tricky here? If you didn't put a buyer here, it's telling you seller's broker will compensate buyer's broker as stated below at closing of property if buyer identified above in paragraph 3 closes on the property. And buyer's broker is the procuring cause of the sale of the property during the term. Sorry, because my screen is a little, if no buyer is identified in paragraph 3, buyer's broker will be compensated at closing of property if buyer's broker is procuring cause of the sale of property during the term. So how important it is to just put the buyer in there? Pretty important, okay? All right, seller's broker agrees to compensate buyer's broker. Again, back to either the flat fee, the percentage, if you're charging a transaction fee or any other fee with that, a bonus, whatever it is that they agree to. So let's say the listing agent says, yeah, we're paying 2% plus, if you make a full price offer, we'll give you a $3,000 bonus, right? So now you're going to make sure that you put in there, okay, 3%, that's what she agreed on, plus $3,000 if I make a full price offer, right? Because it's the bonus. All right, other terms. Again, seller's broker, buyer's broker, not by agents. By initialing in the space provided, seller's broker. Again, this goes back to authorized associate. If the broker already has to sign here, they might as well just sign there. Okay, even though it says or associate. Miscellaneous clauses. This agreement will be construed under Florida law. So the same thing that it says on the other one. The agreement represents the entire agreement and sorry, my little screen is on. And understanding between the parties as to the subject matter herein and supersedes all prior contemporaneous agreements, whether written or oral. No waiver, alteration, or modification of any of the provisions of this agreement will be binding unless in writing and signed by the two parties. Okay? Electronic signatures will be acceptable and binding. Brokers' commissions are not set by law, so that's just the disclosure again, letting you know that, those are all, compensation is all negotiable. Again, seller's broker, buyer's broker. I don't even know why they put a authorized associate. Don't understand. But anyway, I'm sure that they'll get that at one point and remove that. But seller's broker, buyer's broker, seller's broker, buyer's broker, initials, done. Any questions regarding this form? This is the form that you're probably going to use the most besides your exclusive buyer agreement.
Who should we send it first? To the buyer's broker or to our broker?
No, this you would send to the seller's broker first.
Okay.
Right? Because they're the ones that are coming into agreement. You can get La Rosa, your broker, to sign whenever, right? And obviously you want them to sign right away because you're going to have to send a copy of a fully executed copy of this to the other broker once it's signed. Okay, so I would send it to the seller's broker first. If you can get our broker to sign it first, that's fine too. It doesn't matter. But give it to them, have them agree that they're going to pay you compensation, and then you can send it to La Rosa to sign on the other side. And now you can send them an executed copy.
Okay. Thank you.
So, Tere, is if the if I send it to if I'm representing the buyer and I'm sending to the seller's listing agent, who is the one who I'm going to be in touch, and she send it back to me with the associate or the signature, is not, this document, it doesn't have any validation. It's not valid.
Correct. Correct. It is not valid. And that just means that obviously their broker didn't train them properly, because it doesn't say associate, doesn't say agent, says broker, right? It's like the referral agreements. The referral agreements, a lot of the associates sign the referral agreements. It's not the associates. And the bottom it says broker A and broker B, not agent A and agent B, right? So the brokers have to sign it. If not, it's not an enforceable contract or agreement. Okay. All right, let's go to modification. Okay, so modification to compensation agreement, seller's broker to buyer's broker. Again, this is a modification to the compensation agreement, exactly what it says, right? So seller's broker, buyer's broker, compensation agreement regarding the property located. So you got the property address. The term shall extend an additional. So here is if you need to extend that commission. Let's say the closing now takes, I don't know, for some godforsaken reason, we had to extend the closing for another 15 days past when they were supposed to close, right? So you might want to make sure that you send this modification that, hey, the term shall extend for an additional 20 days, 30 days, right? The compensation to the buyer's broker will be, if there's any modification to that. So anything that has to be modified to that original agreement would be modified under this particular document, modification to compensation. And this is seller's broker to buyer's broker. So again, this is between brokerages, between the listing brokerage and the buyer brokerage, okay? And it's a pretty simple form, very self-explanatory, what basically the changes are, okay? Then we have the modification to compensation, seller to buyer's broker. So the same, seller to buyer's broker, if it's like a for sale by owner, or the seller decided to pay compensation because somebody brought a buyer and I'm not willing to give any of my commission. And you said that if somebody else brought a buyer, you pay another 2%. This is just that. And this again would be a modification if you need to extend the term or you need to change the amount of compensation. Could be that the seller says, okay, I'll pay you 3% if you bring me the buyer. Then they might say, oh, but that was for a full price offer, or now, you have to negotiate the price. So he was expecting to pay you 3% based on a full price offer, getting the full thing. But now, the appraisal came in $50,000 less. Now he has to renegotiate his price. So obviously he might want to renegotiate your commission. Okay. Again, pretty simple, straightforward, nothing to it. It's just a modification to those other compensation agreements. Any questions so far? Nope. We good? Awesome. That's it, guys. Wasn't so hard, wasn't so crazy, right? It's just different forms for different situations. I have Luis here. In Luis's case, he has to check with his MLS here in Puerto Rico. He has to check and see if for some reason they are part of NAR. If they are part of NAR, he's going to have to learn how to fill out these forms. If they're not part of NAR, remember that these are laws or requirements now by the National Association of Realtors. If the MLS that you belong to did not take part in that settlement with NAR, or they don't participate with NAR, then we don't have to do this. But in our case, we do, because we are part of NAR. We were part of the settlement. Our MLS is part of NAR. So we have to all comply with these forms. Okay. Any other questions? Good, 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 good. All right. I think that's it, guys. I'm going to record. Obviously, I'm going to put this recording on my agent account or on my YouTube channel, one of them, whatever. But also, so if you're not following me on YouTube, make sure you're following me on YouTube. Okay. But if not, I'm going to also record on how to fill out each form. So there's going to be one recording, how to fill out this form, one recording, how to fill out this form. and so forth. So if you do happen to forget and you're like, Teresa, I can't remember how to fill out this form, I'll send you a video because I will be recording, and they will be on my agent account as well. So you can always go to my agent account under links, and they will be there recorded, ready for you on how to fill out the forms. Okay. All right, guys, that's it. Have a great night. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank
and
you.
I'll see you if you want to come back on Wednesday. I'll be having the Spanish one on Wednesday. Maria Yolanda, you have a question or you're good? Oh, thank you.
You did great, Tere. Very
Okay.
informative. Very
Thank you.
informative.
Thank you. All right. So I hope everybody gets those forms and they're feeling a little bit more confident. It's not that big of a deal, guys. It's just a change in doing business. So don't freak out. It's not a big deal. We just need to now readjust a little bit. All right, guys. I'll talk to you later. Have a great night.
Bye.
Bye.